what do you think about consistency and the ability to grow your lifestyle without growing beyond your means?
It's okay to have nice things. It's just, we live on less than we make, and you make a plan for the extra. Unfortunately, in America, I feel like it's, hey, we'll swipe the credit card, hope for the best, and if not, maybe we got to pay a little interest, right? Delayed gratification. I think Jeb Sr. talks a lot about sacrificing now for what you want more later, right? It just gives you options.
Welcome back. Today I'm sitting down with Zach Mofield. He started out on the path to be a teacher, but life had other plans. Now he's a top performing field sales rep, and in this episode we dig into how that pivot happened. We talk money, earning it, managing it, making smart moves early. Zach keeps it real, and his story will hit home for anyone trying to take control of their future.
5 years ago, I met Zach in a little restaurant after like an outbound conference, and he wanted to have dinner with myself, and we started having these great conversations, and it sort of blossomed from there. But you've been shouted out at outbound. You're in a lot of our promotional content. Ceci. For some reason, we've got great pictures of you all over the place. And then you've also been a part of several of our shows, and that means we've shouted you out for commenting and liking. So by the way, thank you for being one of our premier likes and ratings on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Really appreciate you doing that. So if you're listening, go ahead and do that, and then you can get a shout out on the show. But Zach, you are a field sales rep. Well, based on the question, if you go back to the Ask Jeb question, you're a field sales rep who sells through other field sales reps. So you're like sales rep squared. And you have a lot of experience, in the direct seller place. So kind of give us your story. Like, how did you get into the the sales world and start your career off? I believe you were a teacher, correct? Do I have that right?
Yes, well, I wanted that's a great segue, so I appreciate it, and thanks again for all the kind words, guys. It's a lot of that comes just because Sales Gravy has truly helped me out, and someday I'll share with the blessing of Jeb Senior the real story of how we got to Outbound. It's a great story we'll have to share someday. But as far as the teacher, yes, I wanted to go to college to be a teacher. I think we had talked about this before, and maybe like literally 2 weeks before I'm about to step foot on campus, I'm like, you know what? I just don't think, and this is great that we're having the podcast on personal finance. I personally just didn't think the income was going to be there as a teacher for the lifestyle I wanted to live. All the respect in the world for the teachers, because I mean they're literally shaping the minds of the future in a sense, right? So it's awesome that we have those people. I personally just didn't want to choose that career path after I did a little more research, which I was very thankful that for whatever reason I decided to switch to business. And with that, after I graduated at Trine, real small private college in Northeast Indiana, um, so I got into enterprise car sale, or excuse me, enterprise rent a car in the rental car business, and it was crazy because I didn't go to college thinking, hey, I want to graduate and go rent cars. We would just joke all the time about that. That was a joke at Enterprise while we were there, and it's a great culture, fun. I mean, they literally hire the most college athletes out of anybody else. At the time, over a $20 billion company. So, I mean, very resourceful, very structured training program, and I loved it. Did very well. Moved up to the branch manager level, and then from there, really wanted to get an outside sales, more of like an outside sales role, as to where you were selling at enterprise. The coverages, upgrading people, trying to grow your branch. But it was really like, hey, I want to get into more of like the true outside sales. And there was a manufacturing company literally like 15 minutes down the road in plastics. And I was like, well, I know nothing about plastics, but I had an absolutely amazing mentor and teacher in Kevin Bages, who's now retired, but he took me under his wing, and I'll never forget what he said. He's like, I literally hired you because I felt like your work ethic and your attitude were there. I could teach you the business. I couldn't teach you those other things,
I
which was awesome.
I want to get to that because your mindset is truly exceptional in terms of your ability to kind of see what you want uh, and push your way to it. I don't want I don't mean this in hopefully in an offensive way, but Zach, I the way that I describe you is very much in the way that I would see Jeb Blount Sr., the hardest working man in sales, right? That there aren't very many obstacles in your way that I have ever seen you um balk at. I've never seen you say, "I can't do this." You are always getting to your goal, and it goes back to like when you 2 weeks before college, right? You walk on campus. You said, "I the lifestyle I want to live is not going to necessarily be supported as a teacher." Again, no offense to teachers, and I totally want to echo your sentiment in that way. What did you envision how old were you when you were envisioning the life that you wanted to live? I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not the same person. I didn't have any vision. I was just trying to like figure out how I could get a date and figure out if I could make it to my 8 a.m. class on time. Didn't have any vision going on.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and thanks again for the kind words. I mean, that to be compared to Jeb is just like, holy cow, that's like me being compared to like Michael Jordan. It's not even the same realm, I don't think. I mean, I thought, the closest I get to be on the court is like going to the game, right? So, but yeah, I don't know really how it just came about that. I think just natural of like being cognizant of finances, and I think that all really started most likely probably my junior year in high school. We were fortunate enough to have a class called Foundations in Personal Finance through like Dave Ramsey's company. My teacher at the time, it was a personal finance class, and that's where I first got exposed to the Ramsey plan, and I saw it. And for me, and we've talked a lot about this, is like I love to follow a plan and work a plan. And I was like, hey, there's 7 steps in this plan. And it made sense to me at the time, spend less than you make, get something saved, and build for the future. I mean, that's it summed up in 3 sentences, right? But I really think that that would be my guess if I had to pinpoint it down. It was like, hey, here's where I want to be. How do I get there? And let's work a plan. And then if it does, I mean, obviously things don't always go to plan, but it's like, okay, let's adjust. Let's adjust. Let's just keep refining and working the plan. And as I say all this out loud, think about it. It's almost like the atomic habits we talked about way back when, right? It's like, hey, just you fall to the level of your systems and processes. You don't rise to the goals, right? Like James Clear says in the book. And it's like, absolutely, you put a system and process in place, and you just keep turning and turning. Again, back to Kevin Bages at the plastic company. He said, hey, I'm all about the behaviors, the actions, and the results will come. We just got to believe that we're doing the right plan and process, and eventually those results will happen. Obviously, we got to maybe make some tweaks here and there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
you have so you have a system and a process for just about everything that you've talked to me about, or you're figuring out the system and the process. Uh, there are not very many goals or ideas that you have that you don't start with the system and the process. And I'm glad that's I mean, and you're 17, 18 years old, in a class learning the Ramsey process for personal finance, and there's lots of different processes for personal finance. I like Ramsey as well, as you do. But one of the foundational things for personal finance that I struggled with and still struggle with is the habits and the process, because goals are really great. Like I want to buy a house, or I want to I want to get a pool, or I want to buy a new car, or I want to do whatever I want to do. I always have those goals, but sometimes the vision is tough. So how do you start to wrap your mind around uh, the path to a goal rather than trying to get it all done at once?
yeah, great question. So I think for me, the first thing is, being I would say a devout Christian and stuff like that. It's it definitely starts with the faith first. Is like, hey, a lot of prayer of like, hey, God, where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And I say we, meaning my wife and I have conversations about, hey, what do we want to do in life, and what do we want to do with our kids, and what type of people do we want to be. And again, just all like the big plan of like, where do we want to go. It's hard to get to where you want to go if you don't even know a where, and then okay, what kind of roadmap are we going to follow. So as far as like, on the personal finance aspect, we a great thing that, again, being the Ramsey follower and stuff, they talked about going on dream dates. And so towards the end of every year, maybe November, December timeframe, my wife and I started this 2 years ago. Her birthday falls in November, so it's great. So we kind of try and do like a birthday getaway and then have the dream date during that getaway. And what we do is we sit down and say, okay, what do we want to accomplish next year? Because that's short term, right? Just hey, in the next 12, at that time, probably about 13 months. And then, hey, where we want to be in 5 years. And it's everything from like, okay, net worth goal. I would absolutely, anyone listening to this, I think maybe you and I have actually talked about this, is like, sit down and create your net worth. I remember when I first did this, I was like, "Oh my gosh," I was literally hoping to have a positive net worth. Like I'm 27-ish years old or something like that. And I'm like writing down everything on the asset list from like Milwaukee tools to like screwdrivers. Okay, maybe not that detailed, but I'm like it got pretty detailed to try and say all these assets, right?
If it wasn't Milwaukee, did you just throw it away? Did it just not
Yeah,
get on
yeah,
the list? You're
yeah.
like,
It
all
was the
right.
red. It's the red and black from a young age of like the high school colors were red and black, and so my father-in-law got me a Milwaukee tool. Gosh, probably 6, 7 years ago, and so I was like, hey, whenever you pick a brand, you got to stay consistent, I guess, right? So
You're like, if it's DeWalt, it's a liability. It's not an
yeah,
asset.
exactly, exactly. So as far as, back to the dream date there, we did that and we planned out 2025. And so I think that really helps, for specifically for this audience we're talking to here is I would say generally sales reps, sales managers. And as you know, someone in sales, our income, like Jeb says, we're the elite athletes of the business world, right? Like, and what we mean by that is your income could be in just random numbers here. It could be 100,000. It could be 200,000. If one's like a base and commission or whatever. I mean, our income, if we have a really good year, could literally double over the previous year, maybe triple. It just really depends. Does the market help you out? Do you get some windfalls? Are you finally? It's like, okay, we're hitting our stride in year 2, 3, 4 of a pipeline, current customers, all of this stuff. Government incentives, not incentives. That's a big thing in my industry. Does that help? And so without that plan, it's like you could get just a large commission check, let's say, and
Mhm.
you'll be like, what do we do with this? And then you're planning in the moment and maybe emotions get a little bit in there to where it's like, hey, we've had this conversation, 4, 5, 6 months ago. It's like we know what we're gonna do with it. When we get a commission check this year, we've got 4 or 5 things we wanna save for, buy, and then, go do, like, travel-wise too. So it's like, "Hey," and if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I mean, obviously, we're hoping it does, but, I got a unexpected PO that came in last week, and I was like, "Oh," I that was, like, out of the blue. I did not I like 10% win probability. I was like, "There's no way that's coming through," but we still have it, and it came through, and it's like, "Oh, perfect." That's a little extra money to just move down the list of things we wanted to do.
It's really interesting that you mentioned, you're hitting your stride year 2, 3, 4, and what I, as a young rep really struggled with, was the push past year 1. You're not making the income you wanna make, maybe you have a base salary, maybe you have no salary at all, and, you're budgeting, and so the budget makes sense, right? So you have an income, you're making, a couple extra thousand in commission, so you live on that, and that totally makes sense to a sales rep. But I know, and I've done this myself, where you get that windfall in year 2, you get that, that push over the into 6 figures. You get to, maybe mid 6 figures if you're lucky in a year. And your budget doesn't match your your reality, where you have a budget now of, okay, so maybe you made 200,000 versus 60,000, and you went, great, in 2026 I'm gonna budget for 200,000. Well, what happens? You make 60,000 the next year because you just, the market wasn't there. You were living on commission checks, and that's a really tough challenge for people. So, what do what do you think about consistency and the ability to grow your lifestyle without going beyond your means? How do you wrestle with being a sales rep and not having a fixed income over time?
Yeah, it's a tough challenge. I mean, it really is because, I love it when I read Dave's book. Let me look at my shelf here and find it. Sorry, the legacy journey. So he talks about in there, um, you know, it's okay to have nice things. Like, he shares one story just real quick of this guy had a really nice car. One of his friends. I mean, it was like 200,000 plus, maybe even more than that. And people almost made him feel bad for it, but he literally wrote a check for like 10 million in tithe money the year before.
Yeah.
So it's like all a percentage, right? So what I say by that is, how do you stay consistent for us? And we had this conversation once before, right? And I think you were kind of like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you could do that," or like, I didn't know that people kind of do that. We live on the base salary, well, less than the base salary, right? So you've already got some margin, right? So I have a base salary in the current role. The wife has a pretty stable job as well, so we live on less than that. Then anything that comes in, like commission wise, we're like, all right, back to the game plan, right? Like, what do we want to do? And do we want to follow that? And it changes a little bit throughout the year, right? Like we know the next thing I'll just share with people is, the next thing we want to buy on a commission check is our daughter's going to be 3 in July. And it's like, hey, we have a trampoline, but we don't have like a play set and a swing and a slide and all that stuff. So it's like, hey, we know like that's the next thing when we get a commission check, we want to go buy for her, assemble it out in the yard, and here we go. Instead of, unfortunately, in America, I feel like it's, hey, we'll swipe the credit card, hope for the best, and if not, maybe we got to pay a little interest, right? Delayed gratification. I think Jeb Senior talks a lot about, um, delaying, sacrificing now for what you want more later.
Yeah.
I'd rather have the more later to me is having options. I've said this before. It's like, yeah, the love of money it could be, and to quote, right, the Bible is the root of all evil. But it's like, I don't love the money, it's I love the options that it gives, right? It just gives
Great.
you options.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal, I was talking with someone actually I met at Outbound one time. He said his goal is to write $100,000 check to the church one day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, that would be absolutely amazing, right?
I love
So
that.
as far as like the consistency, to back to your question again, it's just, we live on less than we make, and you make a plan for the extra.
I I think that there's I like this um the social pressure almost to keep up with the Joneses, and that there's a reason there's a saying there, right? And so discipline is what you're mentioning, and discipline is sacrificing what you want now for what you want most. And I certainly have fallen into the trap. Salespeople definitely have a reputation in most industries and in most businesses. The sales team makes the most money. In the organization, other than maybe the executive team and some other folks within the organization, but they're the ones that, they're in New York. They have the suede shoes and the and the Lululemon gear, and they're driving a Porsche, or they're driving the BMW and the Beamer, and all of these things. Which and there's a lot of people, and not to say all those things are bad. Like, there's a lot of people who make enough money, and they have enough margin, and they have the options, and they're absolutely and welcome to do whatever they want with their life. And a BMW is not inherently bad. But what I do find a lot, and it's, I'm 27, you're in your early 30s, is that there are people who are around our age driving the BMW, M series, M3 or M5, that are beasts of cars. They're amazing cars. Don't get me wrong, I would love to drive one, but they're also paying, $2,000 in their car payment, or, 1,700 bucks, or even $1,000 in their car payment, or even $700. I think the American average is 750 bucks, right? So, that's eating up a lot of your income. And then you have, a $3,000 apartment, or a mortgage that you got into a 5-bedroom house because, you had a great year and you're making 200 grand a year. And the lifestyle creep is really crazy. And I think that what's important is, Zach, you are from a place in the world, and not to like stereotype the Midwest, but you are very humble and nice, and I think you see things from a different lens than someone who lives in New York City. Um and, and I think that what's important to say is, like, it's okay if you're not the 10-year 20-year rep who has $800,000 in net worth, or $1 million in net worth, because they've been doing it for so long, if you're in your first few years. And I know that you probably saw this, or have experience with it. Enterprise is a great company as well, so I'm sure there were people there who were later on in their career. When you were in your year 27, starting this process, did you ever have a moment where you struggled with, well, I make a lot more than like my friends, or I make more money than I ever thought maybe I would, out of the rip. You wanted to be a teacher. Did you ever have those moments where you said, I'm really doing well here. I can just I could just get whatever I wanted. And then you went and did it. Did you ever wrestle with that at any point? I know you had that high school, which is great, but was that ever a thought for you?
Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting you asked that because here recently, I would say within like the last year or so, we've really I feel like my wife and I we've been real blessed and we've really hit our stride from the financial aspect. And without divulging too many details, we'll just say that. And it's interesting because I'm a big fan of compound Darren Hardy and compound effect. He talks about, hey, you're the average of the five people you hang out with the most, right? So I kind of take a look at my circle and it's like, hey, if I want to get to this income level, let's make sure those people are in the circle. And I literally, fraternity brothers and I were just texting. I have a text message thread with just me and two other guys yesterday. And we were literally just talking about how some of us make more than our parents combined in current day. And to tie that back to of like you said, the Midwest humble roots of like we all say we never grew up and we never grew up without things and we never thought we didn't have anything. We had a great lifestyle growing up. But to see like where you came from and again, not in a bad way, right? It's just like it's different, whether that's bad, good, bad, or indifferent, however people want to look at that. It's just like, wow, we've done very well. And so, at times it's like, how do you what do you do? Like you feel pretty good about yourself finally, but still try and stay humble, right? Like, hey, we have some money now. Like, what do we want to do with this? And
We
you know,
have what
yeah,
we have options. Okay, what do we do? You're
yeah,
like a dog with like too many bones. You're like, all right, what?
yes, yeah. So it's like, what do we want to do now? It's like, hey, we can go to dinner a little bit nicer restaurant if we want, and and the challenge is when you start to make some pretty good money and you don't have it all going out to those debt payments like you talked about, you hit it right on. George Stanwell talks about in his book, it's right about, I think it's 750, right around that number, the average car payment. I mean, that's crazy, man. You could fully fund a Roth IRA on that payment, right, a year, right? It'd actually be a little over, I think,
Yeah,
nowadays.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyways, without a budget, without a plan, it's just gonna fall through the cracks and it's gonna go. If you don't tell where your money goes, you're gonna sit there and be like, where did it go? Right.
Mm,
So I
mm.
think that's the key is again, I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but have a plan that way when it comes in, it's like, what are we doing with it? Or it'll just vanish.
I want to get to the plan because I want people to hear the plan and how you and I sort of go about building our plan because we share these things together and your plan is different than my plan for a couple of different reasons. One, we have different families, we have different living situations, we're in different states, we're in different parts of our lives as well. Uh, but you have this really interesting world where you have been really consistent for most of your life. And I know that you've taught classes and and you are involved with your community. There are probably people who feel like they're beyond redemption is the word I'm looking for, and they have a bunch of debt. Maybe they don't have a plan and they've been living that way. Maybe they have a family, so it's not just an individual. And one of the problems I think that we have personally in our culture is we don't talk about money at all. Like we don't ever bring it up. We don't talk about it. It's shameful to do so. You always there's always kind of a motivation to act like more than what you have in order to make sure people don't judge you for having less. There's sort of that dichotomous relationship where we all complain about not having enough because of what taxes or whatever. But we have so much in our lives that we don't want to have people think that we don't have it. And so you must have worked with these folks. How have you had conversations to help ease the nerves, maybe, or to let them know that it's never too late, and to help them build a plan to come back to neutral and then start building for the future? Have you had those conversations? How do they go? What does that sound like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question because teaching, like you said, I've taught a couple of classes at the church we attend of the Ramsey plan and stuff like that. It's been great to see just transformation, paradigm shift, and stuff like that. But when you get in there, you're going to get people from all walks of life, right? Like the Ramsey motto is, hey, we believe in providing biblically based hope to people of all walks of life, right? Like that's literally what it says on their walls when you walk in, and that's what this class teaches. And so I say that to say you have to just, have an open mind, and I think empathy is huge, right? I'll go back to Victor Antonio at Outbound. He said, telling this is how I envision empathy versus sympathy when I think about it, right? Sympathy is somebody guy's getting sick on the boat. This is the example he used, right? He's like, oh man, that really stinks. We're on this cruise. That guy's getting sick. Feel bad for him. Empathy is, hey, I'm over there like patting him on the back. Maybe I'm getting sick too, right? Like, oh, this does suck. We're doing it together, right? So, trying to really put yourself in their shoes and listen. We'll just take an example. Randomly here is like, this single mom that comes in with two kids, and she literally doesn't have enough money to make ends meet, and she's just like borrowing every month, and when I say borrowing, just swiping a credit card literally to make ends meet,
Mm.
right? And so it's like, hey, you got to start somewhere, right? The first thing is like, okay, stop the bleeding, right? Like
Mm.
triage. Hey,
Yeah.
if there's a hole in the boat, are we gonna just start scooping out water, or are we gonna try and plug the hole first, right? It's like, hey, let's just stop the bleeding, stop the damage, quit digging. But it's tough, man, because they're doing all they can do, and they've got to start somewhere, and it's a long road. I mean, it is a long road for some people to get to where they want to be. But the first thing is just, you got to assess the situation, see where we're at, and then how do we make a plan to go forward? Because there's some people that I've dealt with, for them to save up to buy a Dave car, if you will, which maybe we'll get to later. It could take them a whole year
Yeah.
to go buy a car in cash and stuff like that, and that's a huge risk for them, right? Because if they buy this Dave car, that is good enough to get A to B, but something goes wrong, and it like is just like a complete total like huge bill. They're like, wow, I spent a whole year saving that money to do that. Then that happened. I should have just went in debt, bought the $10,000 car on a car payment. That way it was reliable. And it's tough, and it's scary, but that's where he comes, and he gives the Giselle and the Cheetah example of, man, you gotta go. You gotta go like your hair's on fire.
Yeah.
The one example he gives that I'll share real quick is, he goes, if for those of who have kids, we would do anything for them, right? It'd be like, hey, what do they need? Like, if they were sick, it's like, we're gonna take care of them. What do you need? And he gives that example to say, if your kid needed X number of $1,000 of medicine, whatever that is to you, to be a large sum of money, and you had 2 months to get it, but you couldn't borrow from anybody, and you couldn't go into debt for it, and you couldn't swipe a credit card, you betcha you'd be going crazy to find it. We would sell stuff, we'd work overtime, we'd deliver pizzas, we'd work 12, 15 hours a day, because that kid needs that medicine to live. We
Yeah.
we would figure it out, right, as parents, and like, you need almost that level of intensity in working this plan.
It's it's hard to put yourself in that position. It's almost even it's harder to admit that you're in that position, and that's a
Yeah.
tough way to be. And I'll give my story really quickly, because I went through this in 2023. I'm trying to remember the year. Gosh, it's 2025. I can't believe this. It's 2023. I've been in sales my entire life, and you'd think, well, Jeb Jr. has been in sales his entire life. Jeb Senior runs an amazing business. Well, he knows everything. I was I was ignorant, and not because of anybody else. I just didn't look. I didn't think about it, and it was all about, I just didn't think about it. And I take complete ownership of that in my life. And what I was doing is, as a 21-year-old, I was offered jobs that I couldn't even comprehend that I was offered. And I couldn't believe that I was even able to go do those things. And I started making more money than any of my friends out of college, like by triple. I mean, like, I was doing better than them day one, and better. I mean, in terms of like financial. But I wasn't doing better than them, because I was no better than if I had made $20,000 a year than what I was making, because I was spending literally everything I had and then some. And it was totally manageable. I was on manageable. I was on my own. I lived in a single apartment. I didn't have. I wasn't dating anybody. It was just me. And so, I'd swipe the credit card, and it would spend all my money. But then the next month I'd have enough, and I would just pay it off. And that's kind of the way that I lived. But it wasn't a plan. It was just the way that I was living. And the debt would sort of accumulate. And I started off with like $1,000, and it was like $3,000 of debt. And I kept it around there for a little while. And then I started dating my now wife, and I started spending a lot more, not because she wanted me to or needed me to, but because I was trying to keep up the appearance that, like, I'm a salesperson and I make a lot of money, and like I close all these deals, and she was watching me close these deals. I was closing them at Sales Gravy. I eventually left and went to other organizations, and I was closing a lot of deals, and I was increasing my income. My income was actually going up every single year by like $10,000 or more. And I was in a really great place financially on paper. But my spending was terrible. And so I started accumulating more debt, and then I started accumulating more debt, and I would just swipe the credit card, and I was doing those kinds of things, and it was like $7,000. And then suddenly I was at another business, and I was doing better than I had done in my entire career, only 5 years or 6 years of a career. I was doing better than I'd ever done. And it was the summertime, and I looked at all of my debts, and I finally started to wake up to the fact that, like, okay, things aren't going the way that I wanted them to. And it was tipped off by, I took a trip with my wife Ashley, and we were driving to New York, and the a paycheck that I was waiting on didn't come through, and I didn't have any cash on this trip. We were in my truck. I'd driven from Georgia all the way to Toronto, Canada. We were in Buffalo, New York, and we were driving into Buffalo. No offense to Buffalo, it was a sad scene. I'm so sorry, y'all. It was a sad scene, and it was sad in the car because we were like, okay, well, what are we gonna eat tonight? What are we gonna do? And we had to go back to the credit card. And in the summertime, I went, oh my god. I looked at all my debts. I was like about $20,000 in debt. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was very afraid. I was very afraid. Like, my body was responding in a way that I was sweating a
Sure.
lot. I couldn't sleep. I was trying to close deals, and they were not going through because I was probably just so desperate. I was wide eyed. I had like energy drinks. I was drinking like 4 Red Bulls a day on top of that just to like keep everything going because I just couldn't deal with my financial situation. And then I talked to you, and I think that you had mentioned Ramsey, and then I started to get into I started listening to YouTube and going to the Ramsey podcast, and this is like a sales pitch for Ramsey, by the way. So if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. But I ran like my hair was on fire, and in 2023, what I did was I decided to stop everything, stop the bleeding, and I worked 2 jobs. So I would sell from 6 a.m., 6:30 in the morning until about 5:30 in the afternoon, sometimes 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would literally be pulling into the parking lot of my second job on my first job with my boss and saying, like, all right, have a good evening. And then I would be like throwing on a server uniform. And I went to a restaurant, and I was a server from, 5:30, 6 o'clock at night until about 1 a.m. And I would do that every single day. And it was terrifying. It was horrible. But what I'll tell you, and you know this because I've talked to you several times in that period, is that I went from a DEFCON 1, like everything was going to shit, like I was not gonna be able to pay any bills. I was worried about paying my rent. To I had paid off all of my debt between commission and between my serving job, which was a great way to do this. I had eliminated my debt in about 3.5 months. I thought it was literally impossible, and I called you in the winter of December, and I don't think that I really told you a whole ton of details, but my relief, I had to tell somebody, and you were the person I went to. So if you're listening to this, like, there, Zach and I came from very different sides of the coin, and we both ended up in the same place, which was, okay, build a plan. Zach and I were working together, and you told me your plan. I like got it out of you. I was like, hey Zach, what's your just asking, just curious, what's your plan for this? And you showed me like a spreadsheet that you had, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Wink. And I took it. I totally took it. And the reason that I liked your plan is because it helped me break down some very key things. And I kind of want you to explain this. You're better at it. Where should people kind of just start if they're in that place? They're in a place where the cortisol is pumping, and there's no end in sight. And yes, and here's the added layer: you are a salesperson, and you are making a lot of money, so you feel like you should be in a better place than you are, and you're not. And that's an added layer of pressure. Okay, building the plan. Stop the bleeding, plug the hole. Now what?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to comment on a few things you said real quick, and then we'll get to where to start. So, um, I think it's interesting. You're telling me this story here, and I didn't quite get all of those details when we talked. And I can remember this conversation. I was in the airport in Wichita waiting to get on a plane,
I
and you and I are
remember.
talking for like 45 minutes. And I can tell you exactly where I was sitting when this happened. So that was awesome to hear the story again and get all of the details. But it's interesting. You go back and you say, to start, and we'll kind of segue here in a second, but is, humble yourself, right? Because, and what I mean by that is, and I don't mean that mean by any means, but as salespeople, like you said, it's almost like we've got like this aura of like, hey, salespeople make a lot of money. They drive, F-150s, I think is what you have, right?
That's what I
So,
had.
they drive nice cars. They drive this, they do this, they go out to eat, they spend money, they got the watches, they got all this stuff, right? And it's like they're trying to impress these people that they'll never see again out in the public somewhere. And so the first thing is, humble yourself, right? Because it can be humbling. And furthermore is, I loved it when you talked about you having two jobs, right? I mean, think about that. Someone who makes a very good income, I would assume, from what we've talked about in the past,
Mhm.
right? And now, and to where this guy's working two jobs. I couldn't smile big enough. I wish, if you're just listening and not watching, I mean, we're both smiling so big because I did it. I did it. I worked the two jobs, did the same thing you did. And yeah, it's like, man, I'm working 12-hour days. But man, you talk about the relief that you talked about. If you're listening, go back and listen to when Jeb said, and then you literally took a breath. I don't know if you caught that or not, but you stopped and went, and then we got some margin in life. And I was like, yeah. And you're sitting there thinking, oh gosh, it's gonna take forever. It doesn't really take that long in the grand scheme of things. You said it was 3.5 months to get out of the hole and be like, whoo, we can breathe, man. We can breathe.
Yeah.
Like, I know I got groceries that I can buy on Friday, right?
It's
That's a tough
exactly what it
feeling,
was. It's
right?
exactly what it was.
And
Yeah.
and so where to start, to dive a little bit further, like you said, it's very humbling to make good money and then go have to work two jobs.
Mm.
I have done it. I worked at a home improvement store for 6, 8 months while working in sales and doing all that stuff too. And it does take two people, right? I can't remember if you and Ashley were married or not yet when you did this, but my wife's second job was doing all the housework, cleaning, helping me pack lunches and dinners because it's like, hey, we're making money. I'm not out here trying to spend money going out to eat while I'm doing all this stuff, right? So, humbling yourself, and then it's like just assessing the situation, right? Like first thing is, okay, how much do we make and how much is going out?
Mm.
And then is there any margin? And if there's not, how do we find it? You know, do you really need the $87 a month random number, YouTube TV, or all of that? It's like, hey, it may be tough for a little bit, right? And some people don't want to stop the retirement contribution. And I get it. Mathematically, yes. Probably if you ran the numbers and stuff, but it's like we're stopping that contribution for X number of months, right? Let's call it 3.5, 6, 9 months. And people are like, oh, I'm missing out on the free money. You can't breathe right now if
Yeah.
you're in this situation.
Yeah.
Who cares about the future self for this 9 months, right? Like it is so hard for people to mentally shut off that retirement for 6 to 9 months. But and that's just an option to create margin. So humble yourself, find margin, and then work a plan. That's really where to get on the other side, to then the goal to build wealth and give, right? I
I
mean, it is amazing when you get on this other side, and it sounds like you guys have got there, and I'll say somewhat recently have. And you talk about walking outside going, I don't owe anybody any money. Can't wait for that day, when the home's paid off. It's like, this is ours.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I remember you working at that store, and to me, when I first started talking to you, I was like, all right, this guy's working at the store. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little judgmental. I was like, all right, was he working at two jobs? He's in sales. But when I had to go do it, I humbled myself, and I will self admit before anybody in the YouTube comments has anything to say, I'm an idiot. Right? I made mistakes. I wasn't thinking about things, and when I got into the place where I was finally humbling myself, it was a while before I truly even admitted to myself what was happening. And then I got into the restaurant, and I was there, and every single person, and I don't know if you had this experience, every single person there was like, don't you like work in a sales role? Like, don't you like have corporate America, or like, like an office job? What are you doing here? And that was a tough question. And I at first, at the time I wasn't married to Ashley, but we were getting married, and I would just tell people, "Hey, I'm saving for my wedding." And that's what I would tell people for a long time. And then eventually I just like, I couldn't lie about that anymore. And I just had to say, I'm paying off my debt. Like I had to be honest with myself and honest in front of other people in order for, you know, myself and my family to really face the challenge. If you're trying to mask it in a bunch of ways, whether that's, you know, not admitting it to yourself or not writing it down on a plan or not, you know, being able to talk to it about people that you trust. Like I don't even think I told you very much because it was so shameful. But I can tell you that on the other side of that is that breath of fresh air. It's that margin. It's the ability to have options. You know, now you know, my wife and my kids and we want to do something fun with our lives. And no, we're not, you know, I'm not saying that by any means we've made it to the mansion on the hill and we're driving the, you know, the Rolls Royce. That's not what's happening. We just have room for margin to say, you know what, in 2 weeks, I think we can fit that in based on our lifestyle. Or in 2 months, you know, hey, this is gonna have to wait 2 months. Or, you know, if we're gonna take that trip, it's gonna be in December. It's not gonna be this month. And you come to your conversations at home with yourself, with your finances, with a bit more of a sober attitude. And I think that's what inhibited me um to really make progress with my life was I was money was sort of like alcohol. It was sort of like a, you know, an addiction in a way where I knew what I was doing was wrong, spending. Like I remember the feelings of like I shouldn't do this, but just one more. You know, just one more. And it'll be fine. And it didn't play out very well. It just made me so scared that, you know, when you say the investments. So one thing I did, judge me all you want for it because as you should, is that I was putting money in like Roth IRAs and investment accounts like stock options like ETFs, and I had like this massive portfolio of and a 401k, and I was getting all the match and this massive portfolio of investments. Yet I was $20,000 in debt. The math was not mathing. Like I could not outpace the 22% on the credit card with the stock market. It just wasn't happening. But for some reason, I just didn't think of it that way. And so, you know, for you, from your perspective, Zach, you know, if you were going back to your 20 something self, you know, you're coming out of college. What would what advice would you give that you think would have a major impact on your future?
Yeah, that's a great question because I had been exposed to the Ramsey plan, right? And I knew and I had the head knowledge of hey, do this, do that. But then kind of like you said, just didn't follow it at the time coming out of college, right? Had decided to buy a few things, and it's like okay, we can put it on a payment, we can afford that. The best advice I think, like if I could go back and like give to someone in my shoes is I had a really fun time at Enterprise Rent a Car, and I actually lived downtown Indianapolis for a while, and spent every nickel I made. I mean, but it was fun, right? Like it's like, oh, I went to Colts games, Pacers games, anything that was going on downtown. The national championship happened to be in town for the NCAA men's tournament, and went to that,
Wow.
and it's like, oh, it's some great memories and fun, but it's like compound interest, man. I could have been much further ahead, but it's a learning experience too. So I guess give yourself some grace if you're at the spot that you and I sounds like we've both been, where it's like, holy cow, man, we got a pretty big mountain of debt or something to climb out of here. It happens, right? But as far as advice is, the great one of the greatest lines I've heard the Ramsey thing say is like the tortoise always wins, right? When you read that book, the tortoise always wins. It just takes time. There's no get rich quick. There's a lot of people out there that think there is. And don't get me wrong, some people have excellent market timing and they just happen to do it, right? But it's slow, it's methodical, it takes time, and it could take a decade or longer, maybe 2 decades to build wealth and reach that millionaire status once you get rolling. But it works, right? Tens of thousands of people have done this, and it's slow and methodical. And interesting enough, to tie this all back into the beginning, when Ramsey did that largest study of millionaires ever done, it's like 10,000, over 10,000 surveys. And I'll pause on that real quick. Millionaire, just for those that don't know, it's what you own, or excuse me, what you owe let me try that again. What you own minus what you owe. It's not someone who makes $1 million a year, right? Because there is a big differentiation
Yep.
in that. But when they did that study, one of the 4 top things that they found career-wise was a teacher.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, what do they do all the time? They make plans for students and then they follow them, right? There were 3 other careers that you can go look up and see if they want. But
I'm gonna admit this. When I went to college, I wanted to be a teacher.
yeah,
We maybe should have been teachers.
yeah, there you go, right? And it's interesting when we talked about this, right? You said, "Hey, Zach, what's your why?" When I was trying to write a business plan a couple years ago, or what's your, what's your why or something like that. I think you asked, and I was like, "Oh, we're the best at this." And you said, "No, no, no, no. What's your why that can translate wherever you go?" And I'm extremely grateful for that conversation that we had because, in a sense, salespeople are teachers, right? I'm
Mm,
gonna understand, ask a bunch of questions, and then lead you to what I think is best for you based on what you've told me, and have the heart of a teacher.
I love that. I want to say as well, if you're listening to this and you are in a situation where you're relating to anything that we're talking about, the thing I would say to myself is give yourself grace. I love that. Give yourself grace first. It's okay to make mistakes. We all do it. You're not unique. Your situation isn't the first. You're not the first person in the world who's ever made a financial mistake, and you will not be the last person. And what I would say is, first of all, give yourself grace. It's easy to beat yourself up, and I did it for a long time, and I still do it. I have to really work on, like, hey, it's not that you are a bad person or that you are irredeemable or that you'll never get out of whatever it is. You made a mistake, now fix it. So take it to that next level, and that is to, one, figure out where to just, you're doing something wrong. Whatever that is, you can feel it. I can't prescribe it or diagnose it for you, but whatever that is, and if you can cut that out to give yourself more margin in your life, do everything you can to get margin. Go to the games, go to the Indianapolis Colts games, go to the Pacers games, go to all those games. If you're like, whatever age you are, go to those games. I don't want to take that away from you, but understand that opportunity cost is real. You may not pay for it next month. You may not pay for it next year. I am paying for things that I did when I was 21 today. Things that I like Zach said, I could have been much farther ahead today if I had made better decisions a few years ago. Again, give yourself grace. You can't fix the past. You can fix the future, but remember that the actions you take now sacrifice something in the future, or they build something for the future. Um, and as a sales rep, you're going to deal with a lot of different things. Zach and I talked about the pressures, the perceptions, the what people may or may not think of what you do. One of the things that Zach does really well is he's very grounded. He's got his faith. Zach, you got your faith.
Oh yeah, for sure,
Okay,
hands down, man, absolutely.
I figured. So he's grounded. He's got his faith. It doesn't have to be faith in what Zach believes, but you have to find a place for your feet to land that gives you clarity and a bit of sober realization that uh, you are responsible for everything that happens to you in terms of your ability to change your future. Now, you're not responsible for someone sideswiping you, but you are responsible for the ability to have enough options that doesn't become a massive problem for you and snowball into bigger issues down the road. So make sure you're always in a place wherever that is, that you are able to make decisions, and you're not forced to you're not forced into a situation that isn't in your favor. And that's a tough situation to be in, because I've been in it before where I had to make the choice of whether I could afford groceries or I could afford rent. And that's not a real choice. That's a panic. Now I'm in a place of, like, what groceries can I afford? Can I go to the Whole Foods and get the fresh things, or should I go to Walmart and get and get the less quality produce? And sometimes I go get the less quality produce, but that's a decision that I get to make. So those are the things that I would revisit as well. Any final words for those that you want to impact with the the personal finance perspective?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would just end on is, you talked about in that example right there of like, paying buying groceries or paying rent, right? Like those are the part of the four walls that you need, right? It's like, hey, take care of like you have a place to live and is your electricity paid so you're warm or, that the family is too, and then you have groceries. Once you make that shift and we stop and then start getting some momentum instead of it's looking at it as, instead of paying for stuff in the rearview mirror, we're looking in you're almost coming on offense now instead of playing defense. Hey, we've already paid for all that. Now let's see what we want to buy in the future, right? And you kind of talked about this real briefly about getting margin, or you're like, hey, we'll fit that into the budget in 2 weeks. What we kind of wife and I think of stuff now is like, hey, if we want something, how many months is that going to take for us to save? We'll just use a random example. It's like, hey, we want to go buy a $10,000 used car. Let's say we've got $2,000 a month of margin. We know that like, hey, that car's going to cost us 5 months. Instead of thinking of it in terms of dollars in a sense, that's maybe not always the best way to do it if it's a larger purchase, right? And that's relative to your income.
Mm,
But it's like, hey, that car cost me 5 months. Well, yeah, I can wait 5 months for that. Like, let's do it, and we have a plan
yep.
again, right? So coming back to the plan, so really to sum everything up, it's we're gonna plan. You've got to start somewhere. You got to humble yourself, and then really working at it with someone that can hold you accountable is definitely going to help you then be on the offensive attack to build wealth.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for your time. To tie this back into sales and what we do is Zach and I both experience where you have the breath, you have the breath of fresh air, you have the relief. It makes you a better prospector. It makes you a better closer. It makes you better in just in discovery. You can ask more questions. You can take more time because you're not under the gun. And we talk about that in sales, where if you fail to prospect and you have an empty pipeline, you're not going to be as at your best self in the different parts of the sales process. Well, before you even start prospecting, do you have your financial situation set up so that you can prospect freely, so that when you get the rejection, it's not oh my god if I don't, or oh my gosh if I don't get the next meeting on my calendar, I'm not going to be able to pay rent, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's where we tie that back into sales. Be confident because of the process and the plan. Zach, I appreciate your time, man. That was a fun conversation. It gets heavy, it's tough to talk about, but it's important. I think it's important.
We appreciate Zach for bringing the heat. From teaching to crushing it in field sales, his story is proof that it's never too late to bet on yourself. And those finance insights, simple, sharp, real world ready. If you're trying to get smarter with your money or thinking about making a career jump, this one's a must listen. Hit like, drop a comment with your favorite takeaway, and subscribe for more solid conversations coming your way.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure to click like and subscribe so you never miss a single video. And if you want more sales training content, go to learn.salesgravy.com.